Hello and welcome to my Exploring Design Identity sketchbook. The first weeks of the project we had talks from designers and we also mapped different design lenses to identify what we might do for our project. When picking case studies, I initially picked some designs that I liked already. In the first example, I have a Bang & Olufsen speaker. The reasons I liked this was its use of mix of material and using the style of a traditional picnic basket. The second study is of a Dyson light. The reason I liked this was the mechanical feel it gave. Then I had a look at a smart plant waterer. For this I really enjoyed the simple UI. Then I had a look at the Braun radio designed by Dieter Rams. I liked the fact that even though this was new technology at the time, they created a very easy and tactile feel when using. After presenting my case studies, I decided to redo them. This was because I came to the realization that these were designs that I already liked and that I would want to involve people and communities into my project/practice. I initially looked at Superpop's tables. I enjoyed this design as it was to encourage discussion. I then looked at the Everything Cart by Billy Angel, a Glasgow School of Art graduate. This project was responding to a need for a mobile space in Children's Hospital in Edinburgh to host workshops for the children. I like the fact it's very multifunctional. I then looked at a project by Malmo Upcycling Service, which created a line of furniture designed by different designers using waste material. I liked this as it involved a lot of collaboration in the design. For my new case studies, I created this project lens centering around collaborative, fun, and social design. From my project lens, I created an idea of projects that I might like to do. I decided on creating an experience/interaction which creates a sense of ownership of the place that they live in. I then had to have a think about where this might be based. This is something which took a long time to pinpoint a location, but I decided to centre it around Lanark, which is near where I live and grew up. Initially, I created a spider diagram of Lanark including types of people, places, history to help narrow down my project. I started by looking at New Lanark Mills, a place which is a tourist spot and something we learned about in school. Making an industry is a key thing missing from Lanark nowadays. I then mapped out snapshots of history in Lanark. From this I found that legacy and existing has a lot of snapshots, but the future created doesn't. I then had a look into Lanark Community Development Trust, which opened the idea that the community would be engaged in creating future snapshots. At this point I got pretty bored of research and decided to try around playing with materials based on the textile community. Looking at some basic cardboard looms, which is a low-tech version of the looms at the mill, it gave me an insight about it. I also tried my hand at some crochet, which is getting ever more popular. After I'd done some digging, I found a document called A Vision for Lanark and found this interesting as it mandated that creating future snapshots is in the community's mind. I then looked at yarn bombing and quilting, as this was the community using making skills to create things. I then quickly made some quick personas to narrow down my user base based on my spidergram a few pages ago. This helped me as it allowed me to visualize the potential audience for my interaction. I then had a quick look at what is made locally, focusing on some shops, some farm shops and the new Lanark Mill. I then thought of the idea of a kit of items which allowed people to make in Lanark again to establish a Made in Lanark brand. Looking at my project lens, I added some extra categories based on my research so far, including the ideas of made by community and social collectivism. From our first peer review, I got feedback which was around that my project was too broad and an audience would need to be established, and also what might the users get from this interaction. I then decided the audience would be school children. Looking at what they might get out of this, experimented with mini weaving kit idea. In this I found it was very boring. Then I also looked at the idea of using weaving as printmaking. Then also adding images and printing words to weaving. then looking from embedding words into weaving by allowing the audience to describe their visit, then come home with a piece of New Lanark. At this point, I then fell in love with the idea of the textures hidden in a place. This was some rubbings I'd done in a Haldane. This might be a way to remap New Lanark. I then looked at some artists using text and enjoyed the collage effect by Ray Johnson. When I was visiting New Lanark, I found a lot of sounds which I recorded and got some of my classmates to draw what they felt when hearing. Key moving point came here when I came across the idea of blocking some of the image to create a new perspective. I'd done some experimentation here. I also done some research into natural dyes, as New Lanark is littered with plants which could be used. From the review slideshow I'd done, I came out with the feedback of how can you see New Lanark with new eyes, telling old stories but creating new ones. I then redefined my design statement with this in mind. I then used photography, paper and graphite, which I then experimented manipulating in a scanner, and also by using the paper viewpoint blockers to create new viewpoints. I then collaged this data that I collected into poster type ideas, and the idea that there are individual moments of a person at New Lanark, and also in this day and age of AI art being around, this is something which AI can't replicate. I then had a look at some children's museums and I found that they were based around learning through doing, which is something I'd like to add to my design. I also had a look at Gaston's project, which stood out to me as it was a creative way to allow people to record their experience of cities. Still experimenting, I looked at the idea of using music concrete, which experiments with real sounds recorded in public. I made my own track of this, which includes sounds of New Lanark, which is added to the Canvas submission. I then created a workshop which was to get people to document the Haldane in the same ways I was documenting New Lanark. Here is some of what was produced along with the collages made from the data. The idea of this was to gain perspective if this was a kind of workshop that might work, which it did. I started to do some initial ideation around making the aspects of this workshop into individual items. I liked the idea of doing a booklet showcasing the data that you have collected, like in Gaston's project, so I came up with this mock-up. From this I decided that it wasn't really something that was child friendly in this iteration, but it's something that I could work on. In my formative review, some feedback I got was around clarifying the audience, thinking about words and what could it be for the individual and for New Lanark, and that my project was a unique archive based on the intimate knowledge and connection to place. I then done some experimentation on how words might be illustrated through some lino prints and with some blocks. What was it to be for an individual? I decided that creating 5 classes based on the ideas of viewpoint photography, mapping textures, recording sounds, weaving paint making, and incorporating words. This would then allow every child to learn through playing. And then at the end, this would all be embedded into a map of New Lanark along with a collage of the data that was mapped. I then created a news headline to see how this might look in the future. I had some fun doing these experimentations of printmaking and weaving. Doing this showed that it would be possible to make different patterns from a very small cardboard loom. Going for another site visit allowed me to map out some places which the interaction class might happen. I then created a mood board of children's design I liked to gain some knowledge of what that might look like. From this I found that simple shapes and bright colours are the key. First I created a prototype which allowed me to test out the form factor and also the viewfinders. I then designed the other objects and services needed, but they felt underdeveloped and needed more storytelling visualization to fully understand how they might interact with it. To overcome this, I came up with storyboards in the perspective of a child who is mapping New Lanark with these tools. These helped me get into this perspective of the audience I was designing for. When I was at New Lanark, I saw some key details, which was basic shapes that would be good to incorporate into the shapes of the design of the mapping tools. I'd then done some concept development and quickly came up with a design language which centres around coloured parts being interactional and the use of plastic and wood, which harks back to the multi-materials of my initial case studies. After creating these tools, I thought they might need a place to go. In this, I designed a trolley and organiser box system which would allow for each session to have its own box, and would allow for custom boxes to be printed for storage. This is perfect for my organiser boxes to allow for individual storage in these boxes. I then done some testing with the finalised products. More of this is included in the Canvas submission. Communication was next on the list. I created a logo for the mapping organisation. In this, I explored different ideas but settled on a similar style as New Lanark's graphics to allow for coherent branding at the site. I then created a booklet for the children. Upon reflection, I found out that it would be better if each activity had an icon for easier recognition. When speaking to some primary school teachers, they suggested an information pack might help them to do this course of mapping to give them all the information and tools and outcomes. One of the deliverables of this course is an interactive map. I done a mock-up of this highlighting how it might work and the graphics. I wasn't very happy with this as it seemed quite simple and didn't really work. For the Canvas deliverable, I mocked up some places it might go. I identified on the main shaft, which is the first thing that you go when you walk in the main building, as a key spot. I also was thinking about how else the canvas might be displayed. I used Photoshop to create some prints based on the canvas, then I made merch ideas in the form of tote bags, t-shirts, sheets and posters, which could be sold in a gift shop to pay for the mapping tools. I identified that symbols might be an easier way of highlighting each task. In this, I looked at some different examples that I enjoy and based my initial ideas upon them. After choosing a final style, I created these icons. I then created a step-by-step map of what each task was and what it gave the children. This then allowed me to communicate the benefits of these classes. I thought about where else this idea might be, as it could be easily transferred, and came up with some ideas, including the Borough Collection and Edinburgh Castle as potentials. I then redone the information pack and worksheet, including the new design style. Also creating the interactive map deliverable as a video to show how it would work. Here are some screenshots, and the video is in the Canvas files along with some testing with users. These are some of the final product photos, highlighting the whole range and also showing them in action. To end, I created a poster which would inform visitors at New Lanark of this interactive map and the merch of the data collected.